Welcome to another Lazy Shell tutorial video. Today we'll be covering the Levels editor. I'll warn you right now that this is a big one. If event scripts are what makes the game do stuff, levels are where the game does stuff. There's a lot to cover with it. Up at the top, you can choose the music that plays in the level, and that level's event script. The event script is ran when you enter a level. Just a note, it's always a good idea to have a fade in from black command within a level's event script. Otherwise, the game will get stuck on a black screen when it transitions from one level to another. But onto the levels themselves, you can see the level as it appears in the game in this center window. Levels are made up of 5 layers. Layer 2 is typically the base layer. It makes up the bulk of what you see on screen and what Mario walks on. Layer 1 goes on top of Layer 2. This is used for tiles that need to overlap with tiles on Layer 1. For example, these bushes are Layer 1 tiles sitting on top of Layer 2 grass and walkway tiles. Layer 3 is used for extra scenery that typically goes in front of everything else or behind everything else. For example, water levels tend to use water on Layer 3. Also, the drifting clouds in the background of Nimbus Land are on Layer 3. Layer 3 is in 2BPP format, which is a fancy way of saying it can't use as many colors as Layer 1 or 2, which is why it's reserved for extra stuff. Plus, Layer 3 isn't even used in every level. Then you have the sprite layer. This is where all the NPCs and Mario go. There are ways to make Mario and sprites appear behind or in front of different tiles and layers, which we'll get into in a bit. While those 4 layers are the visible layers, there's also the solidity layer. This determines how Mario and NPCs interact with the tiles. Is it a ground tile? Is it water? Does it act as a ramp, like stairs, etc.? We'll start with the other layers and work our way back to the physical layer. Layers 1, 2, and 3 are made up of tile maps. Tile maps are collections of drawn tiles. There's a tile map for each layer. By default, the tile maps for the 3 layers are visible, but you can use these buttons to toggle them on and off. Tile maps are made up of tile sets. Tile sets are the sets of tiles you can choose from to draw onto that tile map. You can see tile sets here on the right side. This might seem obvious, but you can only draw tiles onto one tile map at a time. If you've got Layer 2 selected under Tile Set, anything you draw will be on Layer 2 only. The tile sets are made up of individual tiles, which you can see if you click this button up here. You can use this tile editor to edit basic tiles. We did talk about tile editors and graphics in the Battlefields video, but just to reiterate the basics, you can see that individual tiles are made out of subtiles, which you can change along with the palette. These subtiles are found within the graphics editor. If you hover your mouse over a subtile, you can see its index number. Also, if you click on different rows of the palette up top, you can see what the different subtiles will look like under different palettes. That way, when you're editing them in the tile editor, you know which palette to use. The graphics themselves available within the graphics editor are dependent on the graphics chosen here on the left under the map. When it comes to drawing the tile map layers themselves, you have these tools on the left you can use to draw tiles, cut, paste, move, and more. This button right here lets you adjust layers 1, 2, and 3 at the same time. Say, if you realize you drew your level in the wrong place, You can use this to select the whole area and move each layer at the same time to where you need it to be. This blue square here is an important one. This lets you see Priority 1 tiles. There is a corresponding button to let you see Priority 1 tiles in tile sets too. Tiles with Priority 1 status will show up on top of everything else. Meaning if there are layer 1, 2, and/or 3 tiles all on the same space, the tile with Priority 1 status is the one that's visible at the forefront. Also, Mario or any other NPCs that occupy these tiles will appear behind the Priority 1 tiles, with an exception for Solidity, which we'll talk about in a bit. But moving on to Solidity, this determines if Mario and NPCs can or can't walk on a tile, if they walk up it like stairs, if it behaves like water, and so on. In this window, you can see the various properties that Solidity tiles have. Rather than edit these Solidity tile properties, I suggest using tiles that already exist to do what you need to do. Chances are a tile exists that already will do what you want. On the rare occasion where it doesn't, you can tweak one that exists that's maybe not commonly used. If you know the index number of the tile you need, you can enter it here. Once you've edited a few levels, you'll start to memorize some of the more commonly used index numbers. Or if you're looking for a tile in particular, you can use the search function and search for the particular properties you need. This is a good time to mention one handy feature. You can right-click on a tile in the tile map, select Find in Tile Set, and it will bring that tile up. That works for both Solidity tiles and visual tiles. I won't go in depth into all of these properties, as most of them are pretty self-explanatory if you just read them, but of note is this Priority section. This determines whether or not Mario or other sprites standing on that tile are given priority visually or not. You would use these Priority 1 tiles we talked about earlier to give a particular tile visual preference over other overlapping tiles, and you would then use these Solidity tiles to determine if Mario and NPCs should overlap all of those tiles or not, including the Priority 1 tiles. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but again, it's one of those things that if you experiment with it a little bit, try it out for yourself, you'll start to see how it works. So now that we've got an overview of the layers down, let's talk about these tabs here on the left. Maps. Maps are collections of tile sets, tile maps, graphics, and palettes. If you want one area to be made up of multiple rooms, you would use the same map for those multiple rooms, like what's done with the Mushroom Kingdom Castle. You can see that the various rooms of the castle are their own separate levels, but each of these levels uses the same map. Down here to this box, clicking this will give layer 3 tiles priority over everything else. You use this if you want something to appear in the foreground at all times. Additionally, each map has an assigned battlefield, which you can change here. Any battles that take place in that level will take place on this battlefield by default. However, if you engage in a battle via an event script, you can specify a different battlefield to use there. Next, we have the Layer tab. First, you can choose a message to display in the level, if any. You can see these are the in, item shop, etc. messages that you'll sometimes see when you enter those buildings. Priority set. Know that there are only 16 priority sets to work with, which means if you edit one of these, you edit every level that uses this priority set. So this is one of those things where it's better to use one that already exists than to edit one if you can help it. To explain what some of these things mean, Main screen is used for layers that are drawn opaquely, meaning you can't see through them at all. You'll typically see at least layer 1, 2, and the NPC layer selected. Subscreen is used for layers that you want to be transparent. For example, here in the Mushroom Kingdom Castle, layer 3 is transparent. That's why this effect over on the right with the light coming through the window is see-through. If you didn't have this selected, wouldn't be able to see it. Color math is a hard one to explain. The subscreen works by adding or subtracting the colors of the palette used by the main screen from the palette used by the subscreen. Under intensity, your options are full, which will add or subtract the full value of the colors from the subscreen, versus half, which only does half. In practice, what you need to know, using full results in much lighter subscreens than half. Mode determines if colors are being added to or subtracted from the main screen. Again, in practice, plus results in much lighter colors than minus. The layer mask determines what is actually visible in a given layer. You can see the layer mask by clicking this button. Anything within the bounds of this yellow box will be visible to the player. That's why when the player is in this room, you can't see Toadstool's room down below. Solidity tiles also have to be within the bounds of the layer mask in order to work. You can change the bounds of the layer mask with these boxes, or you can click and drag the corners. Lock scrolling will make it so that the camera cannot scroll past the layer mask at all. Layer shifting is used to shift layer 2 or 3 by blocks of 16 by 16 tiles. If you don't understand this, don't beat yourself up. This is very seldom used even in the original game. It seems to be used in levels that have rain on layer 3 that can be turned on or off depending on if Malo is crying or not. But other than that, sorry, I can't really tell you how you might utilize this. I can tell you I made my ROM hack without even touching this. Layer scrolling wrapping will turn the level into an infinite loop. Basically, once the camera reaches the end of the layer mask, it loops back around to the other side of the layer, kind of like an old Hanna-Barbera cartoon. These Culex boxes are only used in Culex's room. Layer scrolling synchronization is used if you want layer 2 and 3 to scroll by at a different rate than layer 1. The only place I can think of where this is used is in the throne room of Bowser's Keep. The chandeliers on layer 2 scroll at a different pace than layer 1, so it makes them appear that they're in the foreground. Layer auto-scrolling will make the layers of the level move on their own. These L2 and L3 shift buttons don't seem to do much. It supposedly shifts the layers a few pixels before starting the auto-scroll, but in practice you won't really notice a difference. By default, the layers will scroll until they reach the end of the layer mask. You can use this infinite button in tandem with layer scrolling wrap to make the layer constantly scroll by looping back to the beginning of the layer. Down here you can choose the direction of the scroll and the speed. If speed is set to none, it won't scroll at all, which in that case, direction is ignored. Down here at the bottom you have specific effects to apply to layer 3. You can see from the choices here, there's stuff like burning torches, boiling lava in Bowser's Keep, spinning wall decor, etc. And there's a similar drop-down menu for particular sprite properties. If you ever find that one of your sprites is glowing for some reason, there's a good chance you accidentally have that NPC set to glow because of this drop-down. Then there's this button, which gives water tiles on the subscreen a rippling effect. Over to NPCs. Here are the characters and objects the player can interact with in levels. This button here on the right makes NPCs visible while editing. You can add, delete, copy, and paste NPCs, and then you can use this button to duplicate an NPC. Duplicating saves space as opposed to adding a totally new NPC. Over here we have the partition. Partitions have to do with how much of the system's memory is allocated to NPCs. Like if it needs to make room for a lot of NPCs, or maybe one big NPC, or if the sprites can use an underwater palette, things like that. Ally Sprite Buffer determines how many allies can appear on the screen. It always has to be at least one, because Mario counts as an ally. This extra sprite buffer makes room for effects like explosions, clouds, etc. To have a treasure chest NPC in the area, you'll need one of these clone buffers to be set to treasure chest. Also, if coins should appear on screen somewhere, like from a treasure chest, you need to have this coins buffer type. The 3 or 4 sprites per row options are typically used for NPCs that are duplicated. If those duplicates are of a particularly big sprite, you may need to allocate more byte space to it by selecting this. Partitions are another one of those things I recommend not editing if you don't have to. Rather, use partitions that already exist to fill your needs. Even if you understand what partitions do, that doesn't necessarily help you know just how many NPCs will fit in a level. This should help give you the tools to understand how to maximize space for the sprites you need, but there likely will be some trial and error to see just how many you can get away with without the Super Nintendo exploding. Down to properties, you choose the NPC type: object, treasure, or battle. Each NPC has an event script, or if it's a monster, a battle pack associated with it. When you trigger the NPC, you trigger this event script, or battle. You can choose the trigger method with this drop-down. Action number is the action script the NPC performs. Speed will increase the speed at which the NPC performs that action script. Remember that duplicating NPCs is cheaper space-wise than adding in new sprites. The caveat is that duplicates can only use NPCs, events, and actions within 7 of their parent. For example, let's duplicate this NPC 0 here. You'll see we can't choose any of these things because they all use the same properties as the parent. We can change the NPC and these other properties though, but they have to be within 7 of the original. Here, let's turn off the layer mask so it's easier to see. The Show NPC button will make the NPC visible. You can have an NPC be invisible and then make it visible later using an event script or an action script. Treasures have a certain property, this down here, memory 70A7. This determines what you get out of a treasure chest. Battles have this property. What happens to them after the battle? You can see from the drop-downs here. You can choose to have that enemy be removed forever, or removed until you come back into the level, or what have you. Below that, you can edit the NPC's coordinates and the direction that they're facing. You can also adjust their X and Y coordinates by just clicking them and moving them around. Other properties lets you control various properties about it, which you can see here. The only one that probably needs explaining is this slidable along walls. It sounds a little weird, but when NPCs move around, they have a tendency to get stuck if they brush up against a wall. Checking this prevents that. Next, we have Field. Exits are transitions from one level to another, or from a level to the world map. You can choose the coordinates of the exit tiles, whether the edges of the tile are active, coordinates of the destination, and what direction the player faces upon entering. Under Destination Type, Level is another level. Location is a world map location. Show message will display whatever message is selected under the Layer tab we talked about earlier. Event fields work similarly. If the player touches an event field, the event triggers. Change the size and coordinates of the event field using these boxes here. What's more, you can make both event fields and exit fields visible by clicking these two buttons. Overlaps add an additional layer of obscurity to the layers that we've already talked about. An NPC or Mario standing behind an overlap will make them appear to be standing behind it. You can choose the size and shape of the overlap, although you're limited to these options down here. You can make overlaps visible by pressing this button. Tile map mods allow you to change the appearance of the tile set mid-game. Let's go back to Mary Moore. You'll typically see this utilized with stuff like doors. You can choose the coordinates and size of the mod, as well as which layers the mod applies to. Press this button here to make the mod area visible. And then just like editing a normal tile set, you can edit it by drawing it. Some tile map mods will have an alternate tile mod, like if you wanted to have a tile map for the door being open and another for it to be closed. To apply these tile map mods in-game, you need to use an event script. Solidity mods work pretty much the same way, but just for the solidity. You can change the size and coordinates here, and you can make these visible by pressing this button. You can draw in them just like you can draw in normal tiles. Again, to apply these, you need to use an event script. That covers things for the levels editor. It's a lot all crammed into one editor, and as I'm sure some of you have found out, there's a lot that can go wrong, but really the crux of using this editor is taking it one step at a time. Make sure that you have the layers drawn the way that you need to, test that out, make sure it's visually appealing, make sure the solidity works the way you need to, then work your way up to stuff like NPCs, exits to different levels, mods, so on. Just because there's a million different things to edit all in one editor doesn't mean you need to do it all at once. But for now, if you find these videos helpful, want to see more of them, please consider subscribing. Again, I know how complicated levels can be, and I'm sure most of the difficulty you guys will have with levels will be specific things that you have problems with, something that I can't necessarily cover in a video. So if you have questions about something you need help with, reach out to me and I'll do my best for you. But until then, thanks, and I'll see you next time.